Hi, and welcome back. Today's mitzvah is not particularly relevant to most of us, almost any of us, except that it is relevant because it points out an important sensitivity in Judaism. So let's take a look. We're taking a look inside mitzvah 65. It is a positive commandment that an owner should allow a laborer to eat of what he is working at when it is something that grows from the ground. Since Scripture says, when you come into your fellow's vineyard, then you may eat. And it says, when you come into your fellow's standing grain, you may pluck the ears. And by the oral tradition, it was learned that Scripture speaks here of a laborer. He may eat produce that either was plucked or is attached, whose work has not yet been completed yet. And by this act of his labor, the work is completed to make it bear the obligation of tithes and challah. Don't worry about that. This means then, not before the completion of the work, nor after the completion of the work, but only during the completion of the work. So there's a particular time that this applies. Doesn't matter to us. Now it's going to get interesting. And for the purpose of returning a lost working time to the owner, the sages taught in the Talmud that the workers should eat while walking from one furrow to another and while returning from the wine press, even though they are not actually working then, so that they should not stop their work and sit down to eat, but should rather eat during the labor while they are walking, and thus not be idle from their work. If someone is guarding produce attached to the soil, he is not to eat of it at all, since a watchman is not like one doing actual labor. If a person is guarding reaped produce, he may eat of it, not by the law of Torah, but by the norms of the land, whatever is allowed in that particular place. It applies everywhere and every time for both man and woman. What I find remarkable in this mitzvah is the Torah's attitude towards the responsibility of laborers to their employers, and vice versa. So here we have, let's start with the employer to the laborer, since that's the direction we tend to think in a liberal society. The owner has to treat the laborer correctly. So listen, the laborer is working on food. There's produce grain in front of him. We don't make him suffer. He doesn't have to be hungry all day. He can eat something off the line. All right, this is not such a radical concept anyway. All right, but what's fascinating is the reverse. Laborers have to eat in a fashion where they're not taking any time from the work they're supposed to be doing. We're talking here about hourly wage earners. Hourly wage earners simply can't be doing anything else but the work they're supposed to be doing. And even if they're allowed to eat and that dispensation is made, they have to find a way to do it where they're not stealing time from the employer. The Torah is very, very sensitive to stealing. Stealing in general, a number of halachas that are coming up are going to deal with this. But the Torah is very, very concerned about unjustly taking something that isn't yours. Or, for that matter, in the case of the laborer, unjustly taking work time away from the employer. It's a tremendous, tremendous sensitivity. I will tell you that I have a former associate of mine who was extremely strict about this, even though he wasn't an hourly wage earner. He even went further than this. But if you called him at work and it wasn't about work, he said, you got to call me after work. Not because he had to concentrate, but this was his halachic position. His halachic position is that this applies to anyone, and that even when you're a salaried worker, the same assumption applies. All right, that's a little bit above and beyond, but nonetheless, the basic idea is there. When you're an hourly worker, you got to work 60 minutes an hour. And even if there's a dispensation, you can't take advantage of it. There's a parallel situation when it comes to the recitation of the Shema and reciting the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah. So workers in the field, they used to get there before it was time already to say the Shema and before it was time to say the Amidah. So they're up in the trees picking at the first light of day, and they have a right to say Shema. So the rabbis say, listen, Shema is short. You're not going to lose your balance. So if you're up in a tree or you're up on a wall doing a construction project, you can stop for a second and say the first paragraph of the Shema. But when it comes to davening, which requires concentration, you're allowed to come down from the tree. What are the rabbis really saying? Listen, if there's no good excuse, you're not going to lose work time. By davening, there's a good reason. So you can take work time from your employer. Your employer has to assume the burden of your fulfilling your religious responsibilities in prayer, right? Fellow Jew, you should respect that. right? But when it comes to the saying of the Shema, the employee has to respect the employer. You don't have to come down you don't have to come down to the ground just to say Shema. You can say Shema up there. These types of sensitivities are found in a number of laws in the Torah, because the Torah is all about sensitivity. We'll see more of those in the coming days. Okay, our next mitzvah sounds pretty obvious. It is a positive commandment to give the wages of a hired man on the same day. You have to pay people for their work when they do it. Or is it obvious? We'll talk about it next time.